Now, if like me, you love shooting wide-angle landscapes, then the Fuji XF8-16mm f2.8 lens with weather sealing has probably been on your radar since it first appeared on the Fuji roadmap last year. Now, I've been happily using the 10-24mm since I switched to Fuji about 3.5 years ago, and it's certainly my most used lens by a long way. So I've been wanting to have a look at this lens for a while now to see if it can replace the 10-24 as my go-to wide-angle zoom. So what is it that's so appealing about this lens? Well, first of all, it's 8mm, which is a really wide focal range, equivalent to 12mm on a full-frame sensor. It's the same kind of focal width that used to only be available with fisheye lenses, but this is a rectilinear lens, so it has no distortion whatsoever, and I will get to that lack of distortion in a moment. So you can see here, just to give you an idea, this is 10mm and this is 8mm, and that extra width is quite considerable and really does give you some extra options for shooting wide-angle landscapes or indeed for architecture. Although such a wide field of view, it does come with a lot more complications when it comes to things like composition, because so much more of the scene is going to be included. But if you love shooting wide angle, and if you're used to shooting it at 10mm and things like that, then you're probably going to be used to dealing with that kind of thing anyway. Of course, you do get less flexibility at the long end, an extra 2mm at the wide end, but you lose 8mm at the other end of the lens because it only goes to 16mm, which is already quite wide. You lose that capacity to shoot at 24mm, which is a focal length that I actually use really quite a lot. For example, it's great for shooting stitched panoramas of a scene. So if you do find yourself shooting in that range and you don't already carry a mid-range zoom, something like the 16-55 or the 18-55, then you might find you're going to have an extra lens to add to your kit to give yourself that same coverage. After the ultra-wide focal range, the second thing that grabbed my attention about this lens was that it has a maximum aperture of f2.8 as opposed to f4 on the 10-24. Now, for the vast majority of landscapes that I do, it really doesn't matter. When it comes to shooting landscapes, you don't need f2.8. But when it comes to shooting stars and astrophotography, that extra stop of light can really make a difference, as it means you can shoot at a one step lower ISO, which is going to give you a lot less noise in the image. Now, at the moment, I use the Laowa 9mm f2.8, which is pretty much my dedicated astro lens. But the 8-16, first of all, it has that extra bit of width, and optically, it is a far superior lens with less vignetting in the corner. And also, there's the fact that the Laowa is manual focus only, while the 8-16 is going to work with your camera's autofocus. Now, for me, that's not a big deal, as pretty much all of my focusing in landscape shots is done manually with focus peaking. The final feature about this lens that interested me is that unlike the 10-24, this is a weather seal lens. Now, I've used the 10-24 for over 3 years in all kinds of conditions. It's got seriously wet on many occasions. It's had waves dumped on it, it's had snow on it, and it's yet to show any negative signs. But there's no doubt that having a lens that is officially classed as weather sealed, it does give you a little bit extra peace of mind. So the first thing that you're going to notice is that this is a really big lens, really big and really quite heavy. It's a shade over 800 grams, which is close to double the weight of the 10-24, which is about 410 grams. And you can see here that compared to the 10-24, it's a considerably larger lens. In terms of size and weight, it's up there with many of the full-frame wide-angle zooms that I've used, and there is a reason for that, and that's because this is a really special lens. Now, let's have a look at some of the images I've shot with this, just to get an idea of how good this lens is optically. So I didn't have a huge amount of time with the lens. I only borrowed it from Fuji for a couple of weeks, which didn't give me really a lot of time to go out and shoot a wide range of images with it. But I think I really got enough to have a pretty good idea about how well it performs optically and to make a comparison with the 10-24. And you can see the two lenses here side by side. Now I'm looking at this in a Capture One. They were both shot with the same camera, with the X-T3. I just switched the lenses and you can see the settings are the same, 1/6 of a second at f11. If we zoom in, first of all, you can see the slight difference in the field of view. There's a lot more foreground here. You can see these rocks here. This rock is a lot closer to the edge of the frame. And on the right here, you can see that basically the 8-16, it really does get quite a bit more in. Let's zoom into to have a look at the detail first in the center of the image at this rock at the back here. Now, they both perform beautifully in the center. The 10-24, I've always been quite impressed with how well it performs in the center of the lens. But I do think you can see, if we look at these rocks here, there's a lot more detail. These just look sharper than these rocks here in the 10-24. There's a bit more softness here. They're just not quite as well defined. And I think this rock here, the lines in this rock is a little bit sharper and punchier. And I think that sort of that contrast and that punchy contrast is more evident on these rocks here in the center of the frame. But when we start to look into the borders and the corners, so if we look here into the top left of the image, we start to see quite a significant difference. There's a lot of softness on these rocks here, whereas on the 8-16 it performs a lot better. It's sharp right into the corners. On this white rock here, there's a little bit of softness. These patches of grass here, this is just looking a little bit soft, a little bit blurry, a little bit smudgy, and I think that's pretty much true. Oh, I wasn't even right in the corner. I think when we go right into the corner, it's even more evident here and on these rocks that the 8-16 is performs significantly better than the 10-24. So right into the corner, you can see performs a little bit better, the 10-24, but there's just a little bit more detail here overall in the 8-16. So just let's have a look at some of the detail here. Let's just zoom in to this, and you can just see the lines are beautifully straight. Right into the corner, you just get this lovely sharpness, this lovely definition. It's a really punchy lens. It really does produce a lot of contrast. I shot this in black and white, converted it to black and white, but I've not done anything to the sharpness, and you can see that when we zoom in, the definition of these lines right into the corners is wonderful. There's no blurriness at all in these lines. Right down into the bottom corner there, we can still see the texture on the ceramic of these tiles. It's really sharp all the way across, right up here into the top left corner. You can see how sharp this is. There's just no fall off whatsoever, and these lines are beautifully well defined. Really sharp, really well performing lens. This is shot at the other end of the zoom. This is shot at 16mm. I actually kind of forgot to do many shots at that end of it, because I did figure that if I'm going to be using this lens, I will mostly be using it at 8mm or the widest part of the lens, because that's just where I tend to do most of my landscape shots. But you can see here it's still very sharp. And right here, if we look at the lines in this railing and this figure here zoomed into 100%, it's plenty sharp. This is my standard lens test doorway. It's what I always tend to shoot when I'm looking at sharpness, and you can see it performs very well. It's handheld. One of the things that I notice about this is that even shot at 8mm, if we look right across the top, there's absolutely no distortion there. That line is really sharp, and it's kind of repeated on this image, which isn't the best image I've ever taken, but as I was walking past this railing, I thought it would give a good idea of how much or how little this lens distorts. And this for me is absolutely amazing. You can see here that there's no curvature whatsoever on this railing along the top. As we go down the side and along the bottom, it's just no distortion whatsoever, and that for me is just absolutely magic. It's a wonderful lens, and that's going to be performing wonderfully for architecture. You can see here this is an architecture shot. If we look along the bottom here, this line is dead straight. The tiles here dead straight. There's no curvature, no distortion whatsoever. It really is a very well performing lens optically. So this is just to see how the lens performs as flare. I shot a little bit of video here with the camera pointing at the sun and just moving it around in relation to the sun, so you can see what happens in the way that it interacts with flare. So there's no doubt then that optically this is a superb lens. For my money, it's probably the best wide-angle zoom that I've ever used, and it's one of the best zooms that Fuji produced. It's really sharp right into the corners and right into the edges, and it performs incredibly well, even at f2.8. And there really does seem to be a little bit of magic in the lens, in the way that it has absolutely no distortion. It takes light from an incredibly wide field of view and bends it around onto a flat sensor. I just find it absolutely amazing. So optically, I really do love this lens. but at the moment it's completely unable to take filters. The lens hood is fixed and there's just no way to attach them. Now, I don't really use grads anymore in my photography. I tend to blend exposures in Lightroom, but I do shoot a lot of long exposures with ND filters, and it's impossible to put an ND on the front of this to slow down an exposure. Now you can see here that a 100mm filter barely covers the field of view, and even if you could find a way of securing the filter holder to the outside of the hood, it's going to vignette quite severely up to about 14mm. So you're basically going to need a solution with 150mm filters to come along. Now, when I was doing some shots for this video at the beach the other week, when the light was at its peak, I would have really liked to use something like a 6-stop ND filter to slow down the ocean waves a little bit, just to give them a little bit of blur to something around about half a second, but I simply couldn't. And then by the time that the light levels had dropped to be low enough where I could get those kind of shutter times, the peak light had actually passed. Now, if you don't do long exposures, then this isn't going to be an issue for you, but I do them quite regularly. And because of that, it's a bit of a compromise, which does definitely reduce this lens's ability to replace my 10-24 for all-round landscape photography. So, conclusion, on the minus side, you've got the size and the weight and the inability to use filters. But if these aren't important to you, then I would say definitely get this lens. From its incredible build construction, it's built like a tank, to this amazing optical quality, brilliant field of view, absolutely zero distortion. It's an absolutely outstanding lens, and it will really blow you away every time you look through the viewfinder, particularly if you're a wide angle junkie like me. So if you shoot a lot of landscapes and architecture, then you are really gonna love this lens. So anyway, that's it. I hope this is useful and I hope it was interesting. And if you've got any questions or any comments, as ever, just drop them in the comment box below and I will certainly try to get back to you. Now, when I'm recording this, it's almost the end of the year. So thanks to everyone who supported the channel over the last year, and all the best for your photography in 2019. Now, in the new year, I've got quite a few trips that I'm really quite excited about, starting with winter in the peaks of the Dolomites in a couple of weeks. And I've got quite a few videos planned for those trips. So stay tuned, and as always, take care.